Colleges in the late 1800s were very big compared to other buildings like the schoolhouse. Most classes focused on literature, history, algebra, calculus, and science courses. Students had to pay a fee to be administered into the college and would have to do their chosen courses. Each of the classes lasted for about 3 hours for the whole week except for the weekend.
Farms. During this time, agriculture exploded over the United States. Work was hard for the farmers, but they got a lot of pay for their crops and animals. One thing that caused them problems was that they had to deal with Native Americans not wanting to give up their land. Early on, farmers had gone through many waves of debt.
The Nickelodeon was the first place to show only motion films. The films were 10 to 15 minutes long, with an admission fee of 5 cents. The name Nickelodeon was first used in 1888 by a building by the name of Austin's Nickelodeon, a dime museum in Boston, Massachusetts.
Railroads. In the beginning of the 1870s, railroad construction increased dramatically. In 1871, over 45,000 miles of track had been constructed. 4 transcontinental railroads were built with the assistance of federal government and land grants. Railroads provided economic opportunities and tied the country all together.
Park. As cities expanded, people were drawn to the few existing open spaces, mainly cemeteries, to get away from the noise and chaotic life in the city. Parks were a great way to get away from the hectic city. Parks were great not only for the solitude they provided, but the nature as well.
Hospitals. Hospitals were not advanced at all in the late 1800s. Patients usually stayed home while doctors came to them. The low class had to go to the hospital instead. Surgery had to be done without any anesthesia or medications, but anesthesia and other medications came in the late 1800s.
Middle-class children mostly participated in grammar schools or private schools, while low-class children could only attend charity or church schools. Teachers working in the poorest districts were usually just locals working for the school. All of the schools were one room holding all grades from K through 12.
Streetcar. With growing cities, people needed better transport. The streetcar was the first form of public transportation, originally being drawn by horses. Around the 1890s, many streetcars switched to electricity, as it got rid of the waste produced by horses. As technology developed, eventually it was faster than horses.
The first skyscraper was built in 1858. They were made of steel and they were only 10 stories tall. They were mostly built in Chicago and New York, and there were many in the cities. People used these buildings for mass workplaces and some residential purposes.
Millions of immigrants came into the United States in the late 1800s. This meant more children at schools. A handful of children became writers and made magazines. Magazines usually had very interesting titles. As the number of magazine making went up, printers had to become improved. When printers were improved, the art of writing and reading magazines went up to its peak.
Bridge. With growing cities, eventually they expanded over rivers. Bridges allowed people to get across without going around the river. Another reason bridges were useful is they allowed people to take a shorter path while not interfering with other paths. Bridges decreased travel time, allowing for more productivity.
The offices usually had a few printers and would create newspapers for the whole city. A one-year membership for a newspaper from the offices were about $4 to $10, and only about $1 to make a newspaper, giving the creators huge profits. Even though some of the information was a little bit biased, it still gave a general idea to the people of what was going on at the time. Circus tents were not frequent in the late 1800s. They usually occurred once a year in small towns. They were crowded with many people wanting to see the events that took place inside. Events that took place in a circus tent was playing with strange animals, playing music, and parading horses. Libraries were usually made in apartment buildings and could hold over 673 books. These rooms only costed $4 to $10 a year. People came to libraries to rent books, and this evolved the reading community. Later on, libraries evolved with the world. In the late 19th century, about 80% of the population was working class. In order to be considered middle class, you had to have at least one servant. Most servants were female. Male servants were much more expensive because men were paid much higher wages. Throughout the century, service was a major employer of women. Before the common prison and mental hospitals were created, asylums for the mentally insane and prisoners. Later on, prisons were created and only held prisoners, and mental hospitals were taking care of the mentally ill. Prisons didn't get many more guests because police had a hard time capturing criminals until the mugshot was created. Later on, prisons got many criminals and they began to have larger locations.
Tenements. Tenements were affordable apartments in poor places that were not very clean and spacious, but a place to live. Tenements usually held around 2 or 3 families in one apartment. They didn't have good plumbing, causing human waste to flow onto the streets. This also caused many illnesses to pop up around the poor cities.
The orphanage system took care of over 90,000 children in the United States alone. There were institutions all over America that took in 800 children each. The average orphanage took care of about 200 children at a time. Orphanages began simple custodial care in no time. The Young Men's Club Association, or the YMCA, created their first location in 1865. Later on, they began giving affordable living spaces and expanded across the U.S. At first, they had many health components like medical supplies, food, water, and clothing. Later on, they added gymnasiums and other activity components to their locations. Being rich in the late 1800s was very rare, but that didn't mean there were any rich people. Rich people's homes were built out of brick and log. The homes were usually gigantic mansions. The mansions had elaborate designs and a lot of windows. Many decorations and bedrooms were located inside of the mansion.
Theaters were used to show plays. These plays were usually melodramas or romanticism. There were many more melodramas in the U.S. than romanticisms. Romanticisms were mostly used in Europe during the 1800s.
Street. Before 1870, none of the roads in the U.S. were asphalt, with many of them still dirt. Whenever it would rain, the roads would become a muddy mess, coating anything that would touch it. The first asphalt road in the U.S. was in 1870, with them spreading rapidly after that. Asphalt also allowed the power roads required for streetcars to be put in.